The domain hot list is like the worst of the worst. And that's what Austin was looking at, which are domains that are nasty and currently active in DNS. So those are the sharpest weapons kind of pointing at enterprise around the globe. What do these feeds look like? Right? Like I said, these can be plugged into Splunk. So again, this is the raw feed. This is our domain risk feed, right? We can see the domain name. We can see the composite risk scores. Again, if you are avid DomainTools risk score aficionados, you understand that it's got four main components. You can see those four main components in here. What's the workflow look like with respect to like the internet to DomainTools to my Splunk environment, right? So like, again, domains are being created, connected to, observed in DNS around the globe. We have a network that's catching all of that. The next layer is basically integrating that feed, right, from the internet down into your Splunk environment, and then basically being able to generate similar processes and workflows that I've touched on before, which is, hey, I want to initiate some sort of blocking. I want to create a notable event. I want to do some other sort of mitigation step. All of that can be done through a feed. So basically that the workflow would be, hey, take in the feed and then compare your logs against said feed. So there's other components that in workflows that are enabled by being able to integrate into a SIM environment, a feed, much like what Austin had covered, which is like, hey, I want to do some threat hunting, for example. Before I get there, for example, for a second, actually, this is what the domain risk feed looks like in Splunk. So if I come back here, right, here's your domain risk feed, kind of as a raw data set from the command line. This is what that same feed looks like in Splunk, right? So it's kind of like a one-to-one match, really easy to do. Splunk is designed to make that kind of transition pretty easy. You know, the thought that occurred to me that's kind of really important to talk through as we think about the bulk enrichment component to having domain tools in a SIM versus the feed angle. So like why feeds though, right? So there are definitely situations where feeds are maybe most relevant for enrichment in a SIM. Volume concerns. So like, as I mentioned before, like in a super high volume protected environment where there's millions and millions and millions of domain connections per day, that's a lot of API calls, right? There's a threshold where making all of those calls becomes kind of problematic. That's where feeds comes in. We're giving you the feed. You do the post processing of your logs against that feed. That feed and that data that you're getting from domain tools is largely fixed, whereas the enrichment lifecycle is a little bit different than that. The second bullet here, it enables more workflows. Like I said, just like Austin covered with doing some of that threat hunting for specific supply chain attacks or even like customer lookalike domains, whatever it might be. Like I said, we're giving you that list. You can take that list and do post-processing on it in a lot of different ways, whether it's native in the tool, like the tip, and I'll show you here in a second how to do that in Splunk. Our last bullet here is like, it's not always that simple. Not every single SIM can accept and do the bulk enrichment process that we looked at for SIM, right? Like, or for Splunk rather. Splunk is extremely feature-rich integration that we have. The design of the feeds being able to be called through the API makes it a lot easier to like plug and play that data in other technology types, be it a SIM, be it a tip, be it a SOAR.